Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Dorothy Wells, a 68-year-old widow, uncovering her daughter-in-law's sinister plot to drug her and seize her savings. With a homeless boy's warning, she confronts betrayal, reclaims her life, and builds a new family. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The morning was cloaked in a peculiar stillness, the kind that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to unravel. I stood at the kitchen island in my son's pristine suburban home in Denver, my fingers curled around the handle of a blue ceramic mug adorned with delicate white flowers. The coffee inside steamed its rich aroma, curling upward like a siren's call. But today, something felt off. Something I couldn't name until a crumpled piece of paper changed everything. I'm Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, a widow of 6 months, and until that moment, I thought I knew my family. My husband Frank had been my anchor for 43 years, and his death left me adrift, washed up in the home of my son Michael and his wife Sarah. They'd welcomed me, or so they said, insisting it was temporary until I found my footing. But their house, with its polished surfaces and carefully curated decor, felt like a museum where I was an exhibit nobody wanted to see. I was a guest in a life that wasn't mine, my presence tolerated, but never embraced. That Tuesday morning began like any other, or so I thought. Sarah, with her perfect blonde hair and a smile that never quite touched her eyes, had prepared the coffee as she did every day since I'd arrived. "Fresh pot for you, Dorothy," she said, her voice smooth as silk but cold as the marble countertop. She handed me the blue mug, the one she always chose for me, while she and Michael sipped from plain white ones. I should have noticed that detail sooner, the way she insisted on that specific mug as if it were marked for me alone. But grief has a way of dulling your senses, making you miss the shadows creeping closer. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness familiar, and watched Sarah move through the kitchen with the grace of a predator. She announced she was heading to the grocery store, her designer purse slung over her shoulder. "Make yourself at home," she said, the words dripping with irony, as if I could in a house where every corner reminded me I was an intruder. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence settled like dust. 20 minutes later, restless and craving a shred of normalcy, I decided to walk to the corner store for a newspaper. Frank and I had read the morning paper together for decades, a ritual that tethered me to him even now. The autumn air was sharp, slicing through my sweater as I stepped onto the sidewalk. For a fleeting moment, I felt alive again, not the burden everyone seemed to think I was. The world smelled of damp leaves and possibility, and I let myself believe I could reclaim something of myself. That's when I saw him. He was crouched on the steps of an abandoned building next to the convenience store. A boy no older than 10, his clothes patched with dirt and his hair matted like a forgotten nest. He clutched a torn backpack to his chest, as if it held the sum of his existence. His eyes, dark and too old for his face, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. There was something in his gaze, something urgent, almost desperate, that cut through the fog of my grief. "Ma'am." He called, his voice small but steady like a candle flickering in a storm. "Ma'am, please wait." I stopped, my instincts warring between caution and curiosity. Strangers didn't often approach me, and certainly not children with such purpose. He stood, his movements deliberate, and approached me slowly, as if afraid I'd bolt. His hands, cold and trembling, pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my palm. The contact was brief, but his fingers felt like ice against my skin, sending a shiver up my spine. "Don't drink the coffee," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. "The lady with the yellow hair, she put something in it." I seen her. Before I could process his words, before I could ask his name or what he meant, he was gone. He darted down the street, his small frame swallowed by the morning crowd, leaving me alone with the note and a growing sense of dread. My heart pounded a rhythm I hadn't felt since Frank's final days. I unfolded the paper, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The boy's handwriting was jagged, scrawled in pencil. Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. Don't drink it. Below, in smaller letters, I watch from the alley. She don't know. The words blurred as my vision swam not from tears, but from a primal fear that clawed at my chest. I looked back at the abandoned building, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. Who was this boy? How did he know Sarah? And what had he seen in that alley? The questions swirled, each one sharper than the last, but no answers came. Only the weight of the note in my hand and the mug I'd left half full on the kitchen counter. I bought the newspaper, my movements mechanical, as the teenage cashier eyed me with concern. "You okay, ma'am?" she asked, her voice cutting through my haze. I nodded, fumbling with my change, and started the walk home. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself were pulling me down. The boy's words echoed in my mind, looping like a warning bell. She put something in it. Back at the house, the blue mug sat where I'd left it. Its contents still warm, innocent in appearance, but now sinister in my eyes. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and carried it to the sink. The coffee swirled down the drain, a dark spiral that felt like it was washing away my trust in the world I thought I knew. How long had this been happening? How many mornings had I sipped from that mug, unaware of what it held? I sank into a chair, the newspaper forgotten, and let my mind retrace the past few weeks. I'd been so tired, more than grief could explain. Mornings blurred into afternoons, my body heavy as if chained to the bed. I'd always been a light sleeper. Frank used to tease that I could hear a mouse sneeze in the next room. But lately, I'd been waking groggy, disoriented, sometimes past noon. Sarah had dismissed it as adjusting to widowhood, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're just having a hard time, Dorothy," she'd say. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about something to help you sleep." Sleep. I'd been sleeping like the dead, dreamless and heavy, my mind clouded in a way that felt unnatural. There were moments of dizziness too brushed off as your age or stress. But now, with the boy's note burning a hole in my pocket, those moments took on a darker hue. What had Sarah been doing to me, and why? The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every creak and whisper. I glanced at the kitchen clock. Sarah would be back soon. Her grocery bags filled with items I could never afford on my Social Security check. I needed to act normal to hide the storm raging inside me. But as I sat there, the note hidden in my palm, I felt something shift. A spark of the woman I used to be, the one who balanced Frank's books, who raised Michael through sleepless nights, who never backed down from a challenge, flickered to life. I wasn't ready to confront Sarah yet, not without proof. But the boy's warning had cracked open a door I hadn't realized was locked, and I was determined to step through it. Whoever he was, whatever he'd seen, he'd given me a lifeline, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. As I waited for Sarah's return, I replayed the boy's face in my mind, those haunted eyes, that urgent whisper. He wasn't just a random child, he was a witness, a shadow in the alley who'd seen something I hadn't. The mystery of his presence gnawed at me, as did the question of what Sarah was hiding. Was it greed, control, something darker? And where did Michael, my own son, fit into this? The front door clicked open, and Sarah's heels tapped across the hardwood floor. "Dorothy, I'm back," she called, her voice bright but brittle like glass about to shatter. I folded the newspaper, forcing a smile as I tucked the note deeper into my pocket. "How was your walk?" she asked, setting down her bags with a practiced ease. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Refreshing." Her eyes lingered on the blue mug now empty in the sink. "You didn't finish your coffee today. Feeling okay?" "Just wasn't in the mood," I replied, watching her closely. Something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, or something colder. "Maybe I'm breaking my caffeine habit." She laughed, a sound that didn't match her eyes. "Probably for the best. Too much caffeine isn't good for someone your age." The words hung between us, sharp and pointed. I smiled back, but inside, my resolve hardened. The boy's note was my secret, my weapon, and I was no longer the grieving widow they thought they could manipulate. I was Dorothy Wells, and I was going to uncover the truth no matter how dark it was. The boy's note burned in my pocket like a coal, its jagged words searing into my mind. "Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. Don't drink it." I sat in the living room, the newspaper spread across my lap like a shield, but I couldn't focus on the headlines. My eyes kept drifting to the kitchen, to the sink, where I'd poured out the coffee from that blue mug with its innocent flowers. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with secrets, and I was beginning to see them everywhere. I'm Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, and I'd spent half a century trusting my instincts. Frank always said I had a nose for trouble sharper than a bloodhound's. But grief had dulled. That edge wrapped my mind in a fog as thick as the Colorado winters we'd weathered together. Now, with the boy's warning echoing in my ears, that fog was lifting, and the world looked different, sharper, darker, laced with a menace I hadn't seen coming. Sarah would be back any minute, her grocery bags rustling with the weight of her perfect life. I had to play the part of the grieving widow, the docile mother-in-law who didn't notice the cracks in her son's marriage or the poison in her cup. But inside, my thoughts were racing, piecing together fragments of the past few weeks like a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. It started with the exhaustion, not the bone-deep weariness of losing Frank that I could understand, but a heaviness that clung to me like damp wool, dragging me down each morning. I'd wake long after the sun, my head pounding, my limbs sluggish, as if I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I'd never been one to linger in bed. Frank used to joke I could hear the sunrise before it happened. Yet lately, I'd been sleeping until noon, sometimes later, my dreams swallowed by a void I couldn't recall. Then there were the dizzy spells, sudden and disorienting, like the world tilting beneath my feet. Sarah had been quick to explain them away. "It's your age, Dorothy," she'd say, her voice soft, but edged with something I now recognized as calculation. "Grief takes a toll. Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison. He could prescribe something to help you rest." Rest. That word again, wielded like a weapon. I'd nodded, too tired to argue, but now I saw her words for what they were, a script carefully rehearsed to keep me compliant. I stood folding the newspaper with deliberate care and moved to the window. The suburban street outside was postcard perfect with manicured lawns and identical mailboxes, but it felt like a stage set, hiding something sinister behind the curtain. I thought of the boy, his haunted eyes and trembling hands. I watch from the alley. She don't know. What had he seen? And why me? The questions gnawed at me, each one a thread leading deeper into a mystery I wasn't sure I was ready to unravel. The front door clicked open and Sarah's voice sliced through the silence. "Dorothy, I'm back." Her heels tapped across the hardwood, a rhythm as precise as a metronome. I turned, forcing a smile, my fingers tightening around the note in my pocket. She set her grocery bags on the counter, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo she didn't deserve. Find anything good in the paper? She asked, her tone light, but her eyes sharp, scanning me as if I were a puzzle she needed to solve. Just the usual, I said, keeping my voice steady. How was the store? Crowded, she replied, unpacking avocados and organic kale with a practiced efficiency. You didn't finish your coffee today, not feeling well. Her question was casual, but it landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my nerves. She'd noticed the empty mug in the sink. Of course she had. Just not in the mood, I said, watching her closely. Maybe I'm cutting back on caffeine. Something flickered across her face, too quick to name, but not quick enough to hide. Good for you, she said, her smile tight. Caffeine can be rough on someone your age. There it was again, that subtle jab framing my 68 years as a frailty rather than a badge of survival. I nodded, letting her think I was still the docile Dorothy she expected. But inside my mind was a storm. The boy's warning had cracked open a door, and I was starting to see what lay beyond it, a calculated betrayal orchestrated by the woman unpacking groceries with the precision of a surgeon. I excused myself to the guest room, my room now, I supposed, and closed the door. The space was sterile with beige walls and a bedspread that screamed, Sarah's taste, not mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the note from my pocket and smoothing it out. The boy's handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear, each one a spark igniting my resolve. Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. The accusation was bold, impossible, yet it explained too much to dismiss. I closed my eyes, letting my memory sift through the weeks since I'd moved in. The exhaustion, the dizziness, the way time seemed to slip through my fingers like sand. There were other signs too, ones I had ignored because they seemed trivial at the time. The way Sarah always poured my coffee herself, never letting me near the pot. The way she'd linger in the kitchen watching me take that first sip, her smile fixed like a mask. The way Michael, my own son, had started looking at me with a mix of pity and distance, as if I were already fading away. I thought of the conversations I'd overheard hushed and abrupt stopping the moment I entered the room. She can't stay here forever, Michael, Sarah had said one night, her voice low but sharp, like a knife slicing through silk. I know, but she's my mother, he'd replied. His tone heavy with resignation. There are facilities, nice ones. She'd be happier there. Facilities. The word had stung, but I'd brushed it off as stress, as their way of coping with me. Now it felt like a piece of a larger, uglier puzzle. What were they planning? And how did the boy fit into this? His presence was a mystery in itself, a shadow cast by someone else's secrets. I pictured him in that alley, watching through the cracked windows of the abandoned building. What had he seen Sarah do, and why had he chosen to warn me, a stranger, at the risk of exposing himself? I stood and paced the room, my reflection flickering in the small mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back wasn't the fragile widow Sarah expected. She was Dorothy Wells, the woman who'd balanced Frank's books through lean years, who'd raised Michael through fevers and heartbreaks, who'd faced life's storms and come out stronger. That woman was waking up, and she wasn't going to let this mystery bury her. I needed to be strategic. Sarah was cunning, and Michael, God help me, was under her spell. If I confronted her now without proof, she'd twist my words, paint me as paranoid, a grieving old woman losing her grip. I needed evidence, something concrete to shatter her facade. But first, I needed to understand what I was up against. I slipped downstairs, the house still quiet, and retrieved the blue mug from the sink. I held it up to the light, examining it as if it might reveal its secrets. The ceramic was smooth, unblemished, but I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint residue inside a slight sheen that didn't match the coffee's dark stain. My heart thudded. Was it my imagination, or was there something more sinister at play? I rinsed the mug thoroughly. watching the water swirl away any trace of whatever it held, and placed it back on the counter. Sarah would notice if it went missing. That night, I lay awake the guest room ceiling, staring down at me like an unblinking eye. For the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear, unclouded by the fog that had plagued me. Without the coffee, without whatever Sarah had been slipping into it, my thoughts were sharp, slicing through the haze of grief and betrayal. I replayed every interaction with Sarah, every glance, every word, searching for clues. There was the time she'd suggested I update my will, her tone casual, but her eyes too eager. "Just to be safe, Dorothy," she'd said. "You never know what could happen." I'd brushed it off, but now it felt like a chess move, part of a game I hadn't known we were playing. Then there was Michael, my sweet boy, who'd grown distant, his conversations with me reduced to platitudes. "You're doing okay, right, Mom?" he'd ask, but he never waited for the answer, as if he'd already decided I wasn't. The next morning, Sarah was in the kitchen before I came down, her silk robe gliding across the floor like a ghost. She handed me the blue mug filled with coffee, her smile as polished as ever. "Good morning, Dorothy. Sleep well." Like a rock, I lied, accepting the mug. I raised it to my lips, pretending to sip, but let the liquid barely touch my mouth. The smell was normal, rich and bitter, but I couldn't shake the boy's warning. I watched Sarah over the rim, noting the way her eyes lingered, waiting for me to drink. "Michael's leaving for a meeting soon," she said, pouring her own coffee into a white mug. "He'll be back late." I nodded, my mind racing. If Michael was out, I'd have a window to search the house to find something, anything that could confirm the boy's words. "I might take another walk today," I said, keeping my tone light. The fresh air did me good. Sarah's smile faltered just for a moment. "Be careful out there. The neighborhood's safe, but you never know." Her words hung in the air, a veiled warning, or my own paranoia, I couldn't tell. But as I excused myself to freshen up, I dumped the coffee down the bathroom sink, watching it disappear like a secret I refused to keep. The clarity in my head was undeniable, now a stark contrast to the grogginess of weeks past. Whatever Sarah was doing, it was real, and I was done being her pawn. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in their house, observing, listening, waiting for my moment. Sarah's routines were meticulous: coffee every morning, grocery runs, phone calls to her sister that she thought I couldn't hear. "She's not herself," I overheard her say one afternoon, her voice low but clear through the thin walls. "Michael's starting to see it. We'll need to make a decision soon. A decision." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I thought of the boy again, his urgent whisper, his fear. He'd seen something in that alley, something that made him risk everything to warn me. I needed to find him to understand what he knew, but the thought of returning to that abandoned building filled me with a dread I couldn't name. Instead, I focused on Sarah. I noticed how she'd hover when I ate, her eyes tracking every bite, every sip. I started skipping meals she prepared, claiming a lack of appetite, and watched her frustration grow. "You need to eat." "Dorothy," she'd say, her concern so convincing I almost believed it. Almost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, I found myself alone with Michael. He was scrolling through his phone, his face tired but kind. The boy I'd raised, still visible beneath the years. I wanted to tell him everything, to shake him awake, but I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I tested the waters. "Michael," I said, my voice soft, "do you think I'm losing it? You know, forgetting things, getting confused." He looked up, startled, and for a moment I saw guilt flicker in his eyes. "No, Mom, you're just going through a lot. Sarah says it's normal after Dad." He hesitated, then added, "She's worried about you. We both are." Sarah's name hung between us, a specter I couldn't yet confront. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just need time." He nodded, but the distance in his gaze told me he was already slipping away, caught in Sarah's web. I went to bed that night with a fire in my chest, a determination I hadn't felt since Frank was alive. The boy's note was my lifeline, my proof that I wasn't crazy. And I was going to use it to unravel the truth no matter what it cost. As I lay in the dark, the house creaking around me, I made a vow to myself. I wasn't just Dorothy Wells, the grieving widow. I was a woman who'd survived loss, who'd built a life with Frank through sheer will, who'd raised a son to be better than this. Sarah thought she could control me, but she'd underestimated the strength that comes from betrayal. I was awake now, and I was coming for her secrets. The house was a labyrinth of lies, each room hiding secrets I was determined to uncover. The boy's note, tucked safely in my pocket, was my compass guiding me through the fog of betrayal. I was Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, a widow who'd lost her husband, but not her fight. Sarah thought she could bury me in a haze of confusion, but she'd underestimated the woman I had become in the crucible of grief. With every day I avoided her tainted coffee, my mind grew sharper, my resolve harder. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was hunting. The morning after my walk to the corner store, I woke before dawn, my body thrumming with a purpose I hadn't felt since Frank was alive. The guest room was still dark, the shadows pooling in the corners like ink. I dressed quietly, choosing a sweater and slacks that made me feel like the Dorothy who'd once balanced Frank's books and faced down creditors with a steely gaze. Today, I'd begin my search for the truth, but I had to be careful. Sarah was a predator, and predators sense when their prey starts to fight back. Downstairs, the kitchen was empty, the blue mug sitting on the counter like a silent accusation. Sarah hadn't risen yet, and Michael was already gone for an early meeting. The house was mine, at least for a few hours. I moved to the sink, picking up the mug and examining it again. The faint sheen I'd noticed yesterday was still there, a ghostly residue that didn't belong. I scraped a bit of it with my fingernail, sealing it in a small plastic bag I had found in a drawer. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a piece of evidence to anchor my suspicions. I began in the kitchen, the heart of Sarah's domain. Her cabinets were a study in precision, neatly labeled jars of spices, organic grains, and expensive extracts she used to impress her dinner guests. I opened each one, sniffing carefully, searching for anything out of place. The boy's note had said she'd put something in my coffee and I needed to find it. My fingers brushed against a bottle of vanilla extract from Madagascar, tucked behind a jar of cardamom. It felt heavier than it should, and when I shook it, the liquid inside moved sluggishly, not like the thin syrup I'd expected. I unscrewed the cap, my heart pounding. The scent was faintly sweet, but there was something else, a chemical undertone, subtle but unmistakable. I poured a drop onto a spoon and held it to the light. It was clear, thicker than water, with a viscosity that made my stomach churn. This wasn't vanilla. I replaced the bottle exactly as I'd found it, snapping a photo with my phone for proof. The vial was small amber and unlabeled, hidden in plain sight among Sarah's culinary treasures. It was a clever hiding place, too clever for an innocent woman. I moved to the pantry next, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The shelves were stocked with canned goods and baking supplies, but I wasn't looking for flour or sugar. I pushed aside a box of quinoa, my fingers brushing against a small, locked metal box tucked in the corner. It was out of place, too utilitarian for Sarah's aesthetic. I tugged at the lock, but it didn't budge. I'd need a key or a hairpin. Back in the guest room, I found a bobby pin in my toiletry bag and returned to the pantry. The lock was simple, and Frank had taught me how to pick one years ago when we'd locked ourselves out of a storage shed. My hands shook, but after a few tries, the lock clicked open. Inside was a notebook, its pages filled with Sarah's neat handwriting. I flipped through it, my breath catching as I read, Dosage Schedule 10, drops daily, increase to 15 if no effect. Monitor for confusion, lethargy. Below was a list of dates, each one corresponding to a morning I'd felt like I was drowning in my own skin. I photographed every page, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with fury. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was a plan, methodical and cold. Sarah wasn't just drugging me, she was documenting it, adjusting her poison like a scientist running an experiment. I closed the notebook and locked the box, returning it to its hiding place. My phone was becoming a vault of secrets, each photo a brick in the wall I was building against her. The kitchen wasn't enough. I needed to know more to see how deep this betrayal ran. I crept upstairs to Sarah and Michael's bedroom, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. The room was pristine, a shrine to Sarah's taste silk pillows, a four-poster bed, and a vanity cluttered with expensive creams and serums. I started with the nightstand, finding nothing but novels and a sleep mask. But the vanity held a surprise, a folder tucked behind a bottle of rosewater toner, its edges worn as if handled often. I opened it, my breath hitching. Inside were printouts from a medical website detailing the use of liquid melatonin for elderly patients. The doses discussed were far beyond a sleep aid levels, meant to sedate, to dull the mind, to make someone compliant. Handwritten notes in Sarah's script circled key phrases. Induces confusion, reduces cognitive function. My knees buckled, and I gripped the vanity to steady myself. This wasn't just about keeping me quiet. It was about erasing me, making me a shadow of myself so they could justify whatever came next. I photographed the pages, my anger, a cold fire now fueling my resolve. But as I replaced the folder, I heard the front door open. Sarah was back early. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to move silently, slipping the folder back and closing the vanity drawer. I made it to the hallway just as her heels clicked up the stairs. Dorothy, she called, her voice sharp with suspicion. What are you doing up here? I turned my face, a mask of calm. Just looking for a tissue. My allergies are acting up. Her eyes narrowed, scanning me as if she could see the secrets I was hiding. You should have asked. I keep extras in the bathroom. Thanks, I said, brushing past her and heading downstairs. My heart was a drum in my chest, but I kept my steps steady, my expression neutral. Sarah didn't follow, but I felt her gaze on my back heavy as a storm cloud. Over the next few days, I became a shadow in their house, moving with purpose but invisible to Sarah's watchful eyes. I stopped drinking her coffee entirely, feigning a sudden dislike for caffeine. I read, it's bad for my heart. I told her, watching her smile tighten. I poured the contents of the blue mug down the sink when she wasn't looking, my hands steady with practice. Each day without her poison, my mind grew clearer, my yeses sharper. I was waking up, and Sarah didn't know it. I began to notice things I'd missed before. The way Sarah's phone calls to her sister were always in hushed tones, ending abruptly when I entered the room. The way she'd linger in the kitchen, her fingers twitching as if itching to control something, me perhaps. And Michael, my son, my heart, he was slipping further away. His conversations with me clipped his eyes, avoiding mine. You're okay, right, Mom? He'd ask. But it was a formality, not a question. Sarah had convinced him I was fading, and he was too busy or too blind to see the truth. One afternoon, while Sarah was out and Michael was at work, I ventured into Michael's home office. It was a room I rarely entered, a space that felt like his domain, not mine. The desk was a gift I'd given him 5 years ago for Christmas, a sturdy oak piece with a hidden compartment Frank had shown me when we bought it. I hadn't thought of it until now, but the memory sparked a hunch. I sat in his chair, running my fingers along the desk's underside until I found the catch. It clicked, revealing a shallow drawer. Inside were brochures for assisted living facilities, their glossy photos promising care and comfort, but looking more like prisons for the elderly. My stomach churned as I flipped through them, each one detailing amenities I'd never see. Because Sarah's plan wasn't about my comfort, it was about my removal. But the brochures weren't the worst of it. Tucked beneath them were printouts of my bank statements accessed without my permission. Sarah's handwriting was scrawled across them, calculating how long my savings would last in a facility, how much they'd need to supplement with Medicaid. My savings, the money Frank and I had scraped together over 43 years, skipping vacations, repairing our own cars, building a future we thought was secure. They were already spending it in their minds, dividing it like vultures over a carcass. I photographed every page, my hands steady, now fueled by a rage so cold it felt like steel. But the final discovery nearly broke me. In a manila envelope, I found a half-written letter to Dr. Morrison, signed by Michael. Dear Dr. Morrison, I'm writing to express concern about my mother, Dorothy Wells. She's shown increasing signs of confusion, memory lapses, and inability to manage daily tasks. I believe she may need professional care. The letter detailed incidents that never happened, forgotten appointments, misplaced items, moments of disorientation I'd never experienced. It was a lie crafted to paint me as incompetent to pave the way for guardianship proceedings. I sat back the letter, trembling in my hands. Michael, my baby boy. The child I'd rocked through fevers and cheered through every milestone was part of this. Maybe he didn't know about the drugs, but he'd agreed to the narrative, to the idea that I was too broken to live my own life. The betrayal cut deeper than Sarah's poison, slicing through the love I'd thought was unbreakable. I photographed the letter, my movements mechanical, and returned everything to its place. The hidden compartment clicked shut, locking away the evidence of my son's complicity. I stood wiping my hands as if I could erase the stain of what I'd found, but I couldn't unsee, it couldn't unfeel the weight of their plan. They wanted me gone, out of their house, out of their lives, my saving siphoned to fund their future, while I rotted in a facility, sedated and forgotten. As I left the office, I heard a sound, a faint rustle from the backyard. I froze, my pulse spiking. The house was supposed to be empty. I moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The backyard was empty, the grass swaying in the autumn breeze, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The boy's note flashed in my mind. I watched from the alley. Was he out there now, hidden in the shadows, watching Sarah's house as he'd watched her tamper with my coffee? I stepped outside, the air crisp against my skin. The alley behind the house was narrow, bordered by overgrown hedges and the sagging fence of the abandoned building. I scanned the darkness, my eyes straining for any sign of movement. "Hello," I called softly, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you there?" No answer, but a shadow shifted near the building's corner, too quick to be sure. My heart raced, torn between fear and a strange gratitude. Whoever this boy was, he'd risked himself to warn me, and I needed to know why. I stepped closer, my shoes crunching on gravel, but the alley was empty, the shadow gone. I lingered the note, heavy in my pocket, and made a silent promise to find him, to thank him, to understand the mystery of head courage. Back inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, my mind a storm of questions. The evidence was mounting: the vial, the notebook, the medical printouts, the brochures, the bank statements, the letter. Sarah's plan was clear: drug me into compliance, convince Michael I was incompetent, and seize control of my life and finances. But why greed was too simple an answer. There was something else, something darker driving her. And Michael, how much did he know? Was he a pawn or a partner? I spent the next few days in a careful dance of deception. Each morning, Sarah handed me the blue mug, her smile a mask I now saw through. I'd pretend to sip, then find an excuse, a bathroom break, a spilled napkin to pour the coffee down the sink. I watched her closely, noting every glance, every hesitation. She was growing restless, her composure fraying as I grew more alert. "You seem different, Dorothy," she said one morning, her tone probing, more energetic. "Just feeling better," I replied, my smile as false as hers. "Maybe the fresh air's helping." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. She couldn't know I was onto her, not yet. But I was running out of time. Michael was due back from his business trip soon, and I needed more than photographs to confront them. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed, something that would force Michael to see the truth about his wife. One evening, as Sarah was out at a book club she never read for, I returned to the alley. The abandoned building loomed like a sentinel, its broken windows catching the last light of dusk. I moved closer, my heart pounding, and whispered, "I know you're there. Thank you for the note. I need your help." A rustle, then silence. I waited, my breath visible in the cold air, but no one appeared. Disappointed but undeterred, I turned to leave, then stopped. Tucked into a crack in the building's wall was a small, folded paper, identical to the one the boy had given me. My hands shook as I opened it. The same shaky handwriting. "Check the basement." She hides things there. The basement! I hadn't thought of it, hadn't been down there since I'd moved in. It was Sarah's storage space, filled with boxes she claimed were old furniture and holiday decorations. I returned to the house, my mind racing. The basement door was locked, but I remembered a spare key in the kitchen junk drawer. I found it, a small brass key that felt heavier than it should, and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in Sarah's precise script. I started with the nearest one, pulling it open to find Christmas ornaments and tangled lights. But beneath them was a small lockbox, similar to the one in the pantry. My hands trembled as I used the bobby pin again, the lock giving way with a soft click. Inside was a flash drive, unlabeled but ominous in its simplicity. I took it upstairs to my room, my old laptop whirring to life as I plugged it in. The drive contained a single-folder Dorothy plan. My blood ran cold as I opened it, revealing spreadsheets tracking my savings emails to an elder care attorney discussing guardianship and a video file. I hesitated, then clicked play. The video was grainy shot from a hidden camera in the kitchen. It showed Sarah, her face expressionless, dropping liquid from the amber vial into my blue mug. She stirred it carefully, her movements deliberate, then glanced at the camera, a moment of paranoia perhaps, or confidence that no one would find it. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. One of the mornings I'd woken so groggy I could barely speak. I saved the video to my phone, my hands steady, now fueled by a fury that felt like a rebirth. Sarah wasn't just drugging me. She was recording it, documenting her control, perhaps as leverage or proof of my decline. The boy had known, had seen her, and now I had the evidence to destroy her. As I closed the laptop, I heard the front door open. Sarah was home. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, my heart a steady drum of resolve. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a case, a weapon to reclaim my life. Sarah thought she was playing chess, but I was no pawn. I was Dorothy Wells, and I was ready to checkmate. The air in the house was thick with the weight of secrets, each one a brick I'd stacked into a fortress of evidence. I stood in the guest room, my phone heavy with photos and videos that exposed Sarah's treachery. The amber vial, the notebook with its chilling dosage, schedule, the medical printouts, the assisted living brochures, Michael's damning letter, and the flash drive's video of Sarah tainting my coffee. I was Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, a widow who'd been underestimated for too long. The boy's note had sparked a fire in me, and now I was ready to burn Sarah's lies to the ground. It was Saturday morning, the day I'd chosen for reckoning. I woke before dawn, my mind as sharp as the blade I felt sharpening inside me. The house was silent, but it wouldn't be for long. Sarah would be in the kitchen soon, pouring her poisoned coffee, and Michael was due back from his Phoenix trip tomorrow. I had one day to prepare to rehearse every word, every gesture, to ensure Sarah couldn't twist her way out of this. I dressed in my navy blue dress, the one Frank always loved, its tailored lines making me feel like a woman who commanded respect. If I was going to tear my family apart to save it, I'd do it looking like the force I was. I sat at the kitchen island, the blue mug in front of me, its contents untouched. Sarah glided in her silk robe, whispering against the floor, her blonde hair catching the morning light like a false halo. She looked at me, and for a split second, I saw it disappointment, sharp and fleeting, that I was up early, dressed alert. Not the groggy, shuffling Dorothy she'd engineered. "You look nice today, Dorothy," she said, her voice smooth but her eyes probing. "Special occasion." "You could say that." I replied, my tone calm but edged with steel. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling its warmth, knowing it was laced with her poison. "We need to talk." Something in my voice made her pause, the coffee pot hovering mid-air. "Oh, about what?" I pulled out my phone and swiped to the first photo, the amber vial hidden behind her vanilla extract. I turned the screen toward her. About this. The color drained from Sarah's face so fast I thought she might collapse. The coffee pot slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor in a spray of hot liquid and broken ceramic. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet kitchen, echoing the fracture in her composure. "I don't know what you think you're looking at," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I think I'm looking at evidence," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Liquid melatonin in doses high enough to sedate an elephant. You've been putting it in my coffee every morning, Sarah, to make me confused compliant so you and Michael could justify putting me away." Her mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman beneath. "You're being paranoid, Dorothy. That's just vanilla extract." I swiped to the next photo, the notebook with her dosage schedule. Then the next, the medical printouts about sedating the elderly. Her eyes widened with each image, the reality of her exposure sinking in. "Where did you get those?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "From your pantry, your bathroom, Michael's office, the basement." I stood still, holding the mug, its contents a silent accusation. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice, Sarah? Or were you planning to increase the dosage until I was too far gone to fight back?" The silence stretched between us, a chasm filled with her guilt and my fury. She laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. "You want the truth. Dorothy, fine. Yes, I've been giving you something to help you sleep. Yes, Michael and I think you need more care than we can provide. And yes, we've been looking into options for your future." "Your future." I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "You mean my money?" Her eyes flashed a spark of something ugly. Greed, perhaps, or desperation. "Your money won't last forever, Dorothy. Not in those facilities. Someone had to think practically about what's best for everyone." I walked to the sink slowly, deliberately, and poured the coffee down the drain. The liquid swirled away, a symbolic rejection of her control. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, turning to face her. "You're going to stop poisoning me. You're going to stop planning my life without my consent. And you're going to explain to Michael exactly what you've done when he gets home tomorrow." Sarah's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "Or what? You'll tell him yourself. Who do you think he's going to believe, his wife of 15 years or his paranoid mother who's clearly losing her mind?" I smiled, and something in my expression made her take a step back. "Oh, Sarah," I said softly, "you have no idea what you've awakened." The rest of the day was a tense standoff, Sarah moving through the house like a caged animal, her eyes darting to me whenever we crossed paths. I kept my phone close, its contents a ticking bomb she couldn't defuse. I spent the afternoon in my room, organizing my evidence, rehearsing the confrontation with Michael. I'd need to be precise, unyielding to break through the fog Sarah had spun around him. Frank used to say I was like a dog with a bone when I set my mind to something, and tonight, that bone was the truth. Sunday evening arrived, and with it, Michael. I watched from my bedroom window as his car pulled into the driveway, the headlights cutting through the dusk like a warning. Sarah had spent the weekend on edge, her attempts to regain control faltering with every glance I gave her. She knew I was planning something, but she didn't know the full extent of my arsenal. Not yet. Mom Michael called as he entered, his voice carrying the forced cheer of someone bracing for chaos. "How was your weekend? Enlightening," I said, descending the stairs with deliberate steps, my navy dress a quiet declaration of strength. "We need to have a family meeting." Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her face pale, but her posture defiant. She'd clearly spent the weekend crafting her defense, ready to spin this in her favor. "Michael, honey," she said, moving to his side with a practiced ease that made my skin crawl. "Your mother had some kind of episode yesterday. She's been acting paranoid, making wild accusations. I think we need to call Dr. Morrison." I almost admired her audacity strike first. Paint me as the unreliable one before I could present my case. But she'd underestimated how clear my mind had become without her drugs. "What kind of accusations?" Michael asked, his eyes flicking between us, concern etching lines into his face. "The kind that come with evidence," I said, pulling out my phone. "Sit down, both of you." Something in my tone brooked no argument. Michael sat on the couch, Sarah beside him, their body language already defensive. A united front I was about to shatter. I started with the amber vial, showing the photo and explaining its hiding place in the kitchen. "This is liquid melatonin," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "In doses meant to sedate, not soothe. Sarah's been putting it in my coffee every morning to make me appear incompetent." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished." I swiped to the notebook, the dosage schedule glaring on the screen. This is her plan, written in her own hand. 10 drops daily, increased to 15 when I didn't break fast enough. Michael's face went white, his eyes locked on the screen. "Mom, that's impossible. Sarah wouldn't what?" I interrupted, swiping to the medical printouts. "Wouldn't research how to sedate an elderly woman into confusion. Wouldn't plan to put me in one of these facilities." I showed the brochures, their glossy promises, a stark contrast to the betrayal they represented. Michael's expression shifted from disbelief to recognition, a flicker of shame crossing his features. "We were just looking at options," he said weakly. "In case your condition deteriorated." "My condition," I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean the conditions Sarah created by poisoning me every morning?" Sarah found her voice, her tone sharp with desperation. Michael, don't listen to her. She's delusional. This is exactly what I was talking about. Her paranoia, her confusion. Really, I said, swiping to the letter to Dr. Morrison. Am I delusional about this, a letter you wrote Michael documenting incidents that never happened? Or this, I showed the bank statements, Sarah's calculations scrawled across them. My savings accessed without my consent to fund your plan to lock me away. The silence was deafening, a void that swallowed the room. Michael stared at the screen, his face cycling through emotions, shock, guilt, betrayal. When he looked at Sarah, his voice was barely a whisper. Tell me this isn't true. Sarah's composure cracked her eyes, darting like a trapped animal. Michael, you know how confused she's been. Someone had to think about the future, about what's best for everyone. By drugging her. His voice rose a raw edge I'd never heard before, by making her sick so we could justify controlling her life. We weren't making her sick. Sarah snapped, her facade crumbling. We were helping her rest. She was grieving, not sleeping, wandering around like a ghost. Someone had to take control. Control of my bank account, you mean? I said, my voice cutting through hers. I played the video from the flash drive, the grainy footage of Sarah dropping liquid into my mug, her face cold and deliberate. Michael's breath caught his eyes glued to the screen as the truth unfolded in undeniable clarity. Jesus Christ, Sarah, he whispered. How could you? I was protecting us, she cried, standing now, pacing the room. Do you know what it's been like, Michael, having her here dragging us down with her grief, her neediness? You work yourself to death, and I'm stuck playing nursemaid to a woman who won't move on. Her words were a blade slicing through the last of my restraint. So your solution was to drug me until I was compliant enough to warehouse, to steal my savings, my life, to make your marriage easier. Michael stood, his hands running through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was caught in a lie. Sarah, tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you didn't drug my mother. Sarah's face hardened, her defiance a last stand. I gave her something to help her sleep. She was a mess after your father died. I thought if she rested, she'd be stronger. For weeks, I interjected my voice like iron. You drugged me for weeks, making me so groggy. I could barely function, making Michael think I was losing my mind. You were losing your mind. Sarah shouted, her control shattering, crying at all hours, not eating, making everyone miserable. Someone had to act. By accessing my accounts without permission, I pressed, showing the bank statements again, by calculating how long my savings would last in a nursing home. Michael's head whipped toward her. What accounts, Sarah? What is she talking about? Sarah hesitated, her eyes calculating, weighing how much to admit. Your mother's almost 70. Michael, she's vulnerable living on a fixed income. I was trying to protect her. By committing fraud, I said. By using Michael's login to access my bank accounts. By forging documents to have me declared incompetent. Michael's face was red now, his voice trembling with rage. You used my identity to access Mom's accounts. Without her consent, I was planning for her future, Sarah cried, but her voice lacked conviction. You were committing elder abuse. I said my words, a hammer striking the final blow. Fraud, identity theft, and poisoning. Should I go on? Sarah's composure collapsed entirely. She stood pacing wildly, her hands gesturing as if trying to claw her way out of the truth. Fine. Yes. I gave you melatonin. Yes. I checked your finances. Yes. I researched facilities because someone had to think about the reality of this situation. Do you know what it's like having you here? The constant depression, the guilt you make us feel just by existing. Michael works 70 hours a week, and he comes home to you mourning all over everything. Her cruelty stole my breath, but I forced myself to stay calm. So you decided to erase me, to drug me until I was a shell to take my money and lock me away. I was helping you transition, she shouted, to a place where you could get care without destroying our marriage. Michael had gone, still a dangerous stillness that signaled an explosion. Get out, he said, his voice low and deadly. Sarah froze. What? Get out of this house. Now. Tonight. Michael, you're overreacting, she said, her tone shifting to pleading. We can work through this. You drugged my mother. His voice was a roar, shaking the room. You violated her accounts, forged documents, abused her. And she's my mother. Sarah's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a cold calculation. If I leave, I'm taking half of everything, she said, her voice icy. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts. I've been married to you for 15 years, Michael. I'm entitled. Michael's laugh was bitter broken. Half of what the mortgage you planned to pay with Mom's savings. The accounts you've been scheming to access. For the first time, Sarah looked afraid, her bravado crumbling under the weight of her exposure. You'll regret this, she said, her voice a hiss. Both of you, she stormed upstairs, her heels echoing like gunshots. Michael sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands, looking like a man whose world had just imploded. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I had no idea. I should have seen it. How could you? I said, sitting beside him. She was a master at this. Professional manipulation. But I saw you struggling, he said, his eyes red-rimmed. The way you were sleeping so much, how confused you seemed. I thought it was grief. I should have questioned it. I studied his face, seeing the boy I'd raised beneath the man he'd become. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. How much of this did you agree to? Not the drugs. I know you didn't know, but the nursing home, the finances. How much was your idea? He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Some of it he admitted finally. Not the details, not the drugs. But Sarah convinced me you weren't capable of living alone anymore. She said you were forgetting things, that it was dangerous. She's a nurse, or was. I trusted her, her medical opinion. I said, my voice sharp, that your 68-year-old mother needed to be institutionalized after 6 months of widowhood. He flinched. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. It is insane, I said. I'm not a doddering fool, Michael. I'm a woman who lost her husband and needed time to grieve, not a diagnosis. From upstairs came the sound of Sarah's suitcases thumping down the hall, her heels clicking with finality. She was leaving after 15 years of marriage because her plan to control me had been exposed. Michael looked at me, his face a map of guilt and loss. What happens now? Now you decide who you are, I said. The man who lets his wife abuse his mother, or the man who protects his family. I want to protect you, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. But I don't know how to fix this. The damage to us, to our trust. Trust is earned, I said. And it can be earned again if you're willing to try. Sarah appeared in the doorway, 2 suitcases in tow, her face a mask of cold fury. I'll be at my sister's, she announced. This isn't over, Michael. I've invested too much to walk away empty-handed. You're walking away with your freedom, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Considering what you've done, that's more than you deserve. Her eyes burned with hatred. You think you've won, Dorothy. You've destroyed my marriage, my life. I've exposed your crimes. I corrected. There's a difference. She turned to Michael, her voice softening, manipulative to the last. Michael, You know I love you. We can fix this. He stood, his face set in lines I had never seen before. You're right, Sarah. You were my wife. But she's my mother, and what you did is unforgivable. Sarah's expression shifted shock rage, then a chilling acceptance. You'll regret this. She said, her voice a promise. She turned and walked out the door, slamming behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. Michael and I sat in the silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. I feel like I don't know anything anymore, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You know what's right, I said. That's enough to start with. The next hours were a blur of raw emotion. Michael sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, grappling with the collapse of his marriage. I poured him a coffee. Real coffee from a clean mug, and sat across from him. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice hoarse. I let her convince me you were falling apart. She was good at that. I said, my tone softer now. But you're here now, that's what matters. He looked at me, his eyes searching. How did you figure it out, Mom? How did you know I hesitated, the boys' note a secret I wasn't ready to share? Not yet. I had help, I said simply. Someone saw what I couldn't. The confrontation had been a victory, but it left scars. Michael's trust in Sarah was shattered, and my trust in him was bruised. But as we sat there, the kitchen quiet except for the hum of the fridge, I felt a spark of hope. We'd survived the storm, and now we had a chance to rebuild together. The echo of Sarah's slamming door lingered in the house like a ghost, a final note in the symphony of her betrayal. I sat across from Michael at the kitchen table, the air heavy with the wreckage of what had just happened. My son, his face pale and drawn, looked like a man who'd lost his bearings, his world shattered by the woman he'd trusted for 15 years. I was Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, a widow who'd uncovered a plot to steal my life, and now I stood at the edge of a new beginning, one I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The kitchen was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling into the night. I poured Michael a cup of coffee, clean, untainted, poured from a pot I'd made myself, and slid it across the table. He stared at it, his hands clasped tightly, as if afraid to touch anything that might burn him again. I'm sorry, Mom, he said for what felt like the 100th time, his voice raw. I had no idea. I should have seen it. You couldn't have? I said, my tone softer than I felt. Sarah was a master at this. She wove a story so convincing even I started to believe it. But I saw you struggling, he said, his eyes red-rimmed, haunted. The way you were sleeping so much, how confused you seemed some days. I thought it was grief. I should have questioned her. I studied his face, seeing the boy I'd raised beneath the weight of his guilt. Michael was 42, but in that moment he looked like the child who'd once clung to me after a nightmare, trusting me to make the monsters go away. Only this time the monster had been his wife, and I'd been the one to slay her. You trusted her, I said. That's not a crime. But believing her over me, that's where we need to start fixing things. He nodded, his jaw tight. I need to know, Mom, how much of this did I let happen? How much did I agree to? The question hung between us, sharp as a blade. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I need you to be honest with me, Michael. Not the drugs, I know you didn't know about that. But the nursing home, the idea of taking control of my finances. How much of that was your idea? He looked away, his hands tightening around the coffee mug. The silence stretched heavy with the truth he didn't want to face. Some of it, he admitted, finally his voice barely above a whisper. Not the specifics, not the poison. But Sarah kept saying you weren't capable of living alone anymore. She said you were forgetting things, getting lost in the house, that it was dangerous. She was a nurse, Mom, or used to be. I trusted her judgment. Her judgment. I repeated my voice sharp enough to make him flinch, that a 68-year-old woman grieving her husband of 43 years needed to be locked away after 6 months. He rubbed his face, his exhaustion palpable. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. I didn't know what to do. You seemed so lost after Dad died. I thought she was trying to help. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. I was lost, Michael. I lost the man who was my world, but I wasn't broken. I needed time, not a cage. He nodded, tears brimming, but not falling. I'm so sorry, Mom. I let her manipulate me. I let her manipulate us both. The apology was a start, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest, the knowledge that my own son had been complicit, even if unknowingly. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. We'll figure this out, I said. But it's going to take work. From both of us. He squeezed my hand, a gesture so familiar it brought a lump to my throat. I want to make this right, whatever it takes. The next few weeks were a storm of legal and emotional fallout. Sarah had moved to her sister's house, her lawyer already circling like a vulture, threatening to claim half of everything house savings retirement accounts. Michael hired an attorney of his own, a sharp woman named Carla, who saw through Sarah's facade in minutes. She's got no leg to stand on, Carla told us in her office, her voice crisp. The evidence you've gathered, photos, the video, the notebook, it's damning. Elder, abuse fraud, identity theft. She's facing serious charges. I sat beside Michael, my phone open to the catalog of evidence I had collected. Carla scrolled through the photos, her expression a mix of admiration and horror. You did this yourself, Dorothy. At 68, I had help. I said, thinking of the boy, his note still a mystery I hadn't unraveled. But yes, I wasn't going to let her win. Carla nodded, her eyes glinting with respect. You've built a case that could put her away for years. The video alone, her dropping that liquid into your mug, is enough to sink her. And the bank statements. That's felony territory. Michael shifted in his seat, his guilt a tangible weight. What about me? I didn't know about the drugs, but I signed that letter to Dr. Morrison. I let her convince me Mom needed care. Carla's gaze softened. You were manipulated, Michael. That's not a crime, but it's a lesson. The court will see you as a victim here, too, as long as you cooperate fully. He nodded, his jaw tight. I will. Whatever it takes to protect Mom. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Sarah's nursing license was suspended pending investigation, her perfect life crumbling under the weight of her crimes. The elder abuse charges were the most serious, carrying the possibility of jail time. Her lawyer tried to argue that I was an unreliable witness, citing my documented cognitive decline, but Carla countered with medical tests, proving the melatonin in my system was responsible for my symptoms. The decline, it turned out, was entirely artificial, a chemical lie Sarah had engineered. But the legal battles were only part of the story. The real work was happening between Michael and me in the quiet moments when we tried to rebuild what Sarah had broken. He took a leave of absence from work, staying home to help me navigate the legal mess, and more importantly, to talk. We sat in the kitchen each night drinking coffee from matching mugs, no longer tainted by Sarah's poison. I keep replaying it, he said one evening, his voice low. Every time she told me you were slipping, every time I nodded and believed her. How did I miss it? You loved her, I said simply. Love blinds us. But you're seeing clearly now. He looked at me, his eyes searching. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mom. It's not about deserving, I said. It's about choosing to move forward. Together. Those conversations were raw, painful, but necessary. Michael was grappling with his guilt, and I was grappling with the betrayal of a son who'd let himself be swayed. But beneath the hurt, I saw the boy I had raised, the one who'd once promised to protect me from monsters. He was trying to keep that promise now, and I had to believe it was enough. The mystery of the boy lingered a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. I hadn't seen him since that day at the corner store, but his second note, "Check the basement," had led me to the flash drive, the final nail in Sarah's coffin. Who was he? Why had he risked himself to help me? I returned to the alley behind the house several times, hoping to find him, but the abandoned building was always empty, its broken windows staring like unblinking eyes. I left a note of my own tucked into the same crack where I'd found his thank you. "I'm safe now. Please come back." Days passed with no response, and I began to wonder if I had imagined him a guardian angel born from my desperation. But then, 3 weeks after Sarah's departure, a phone call changed everything. Michael came into the kitchen, his phone in hand, his face a mix of shock and urgency. "Mom, you're not going to believe this." That was Detective Martinez. "They want to talk to you about the boy." My heart clenched. The boy. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," Michael said, sitting across from me. "Better than fine." "But Mom, his story, it's incredible." I set down my coffee mug, giving him my full attention. "Tell me." "His name is Tommy Chen," Michael said. "He's 11 years old, been missing from the foster care system for 3 months. They found him yesterday, living in that abandoned building. He told them he saw Sarah putting something in your coffee every morning. He recognized it because his previous foster mother did the same thing to him. Liquid melatonin. Massive doses to keep him quiet and compliant." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I pictured Tommy's haunted eyes, his trembling hands as he pressed the note into my palm. He hadn't just seen Sarah. He'd lived her cruelty in a different house with a different monster. He knew what she was doing because he'd been through it. I said, my voice shaking. "That's why he warned me." Michael nodded, his expression a mix of awe and sorrow. "He saw her through the kitchen window from the alley. He'd been watching the neighborhood surviving on his own, and when he saw you, he said he couldn't let it happen again. Not to you." Tears stung my eyes, not for myself, but for Tommy, a boy who'd endured so much, yet found the courage to save a stranger. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Child Protective Services has him," Michael said. "But Mom, he asked about you. He wants to know if you're okay." "Of course I want to see him," I said, my voice fierce with conviction. "That boy saved my life." Michael hesitated, then leaned forward. "There's more. The investigators found evidence that Tommy's foster family was running a scam, drugging kids to keep them manageable while collecting state payments. Tommy's testimony is helping build a case against them." "He's a hero, Mom." I sat back, overwhelmed by the ripple effects of one boy's courage. Tommy hadn't just saved me. He'd exposed a network of abuse, giving voice to children who'd been silenced. His bravery was a mirror to my own, a reminder that strength could come from the most broken places. "I need to see him," I said. "I need to thank him." Michael nodded, a spark of something new in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or purpose. "I've been thinking, Mom. Our house is big, too big for just us now. What if we looked into fostering Tommy, or even adopting?" I stared at my son, seeing a man I hadn't seen in years, one who wanted to do something meaningful, not just profitable. "You'd be okay with that?" I asked. "Having your mother and a foster child in your house?" He smiled a real smile, the first I'd seen in months. "I think we could all use a fresh start. And Tommy's already proved he's got good instincts about family." The word family hung between us, fragile but full of promise. I thought of Tommy alone in that alley, watching a stranger's life unravel and choosing to act. I thought of Michael, broken by betrayal, but reaching for redemption. And I thought of myself, a woman who'd been drugged and dismissed, but was now standing tall, ready to fight for a new future. The next day, I met Tommy at the police station, a small room with peeling paint and a table scarred by years of confessions. He sat across from me, his clothes clean now, but his eyes still carrying that too old weight. "Hi, Dorothy," he said, his voice shy but steady. "You okay?" "Thanks to you," I said, my throat tight. "You saved me, Tommy. Why did you do it?" He shrugged his fingers, tracing a scratch on the table. "I saw her through this window putting stuff in your coffee. It looked like what my foster mom did to me. I didn't want you to disappear like I almost did." I reached across the table, taking his hand. It was warm now, not the icy grip from that morning at the corner store. "You're a brave boy, Tommy. Braver than most adults I know." He looked up, a small smile breaking through. "You're pretty brave, too. You didn't drink the coffee." We talked for an hour, his story spilling out in fragments: a foster system that failed him, a mother who'd died too young, a foster family who saw him as a paycheck. But through it all, he'd held on to something pure, something that drove him to help me. When I left, I promised to see him again to make sure he wasn't alone anymore. Back home, Michael and I started the process of becoming foster parents. It was daunting paperwork, home visits, interviews, but we were committed. The house, once a prison of Sarah's making, began to feel alive again, filled with the possibility of something new. Michael threw himself into the effort, his guilt transforming into action. He started volunteering with a local organization that helped foster children, using his business skills to navigate the system for them. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen, Michael looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom, do you think we can do this? Be a family again with Tommy?" "I think we already are," I said. "Family isn't just blood. It's choosing to protect each other, to show up when it matters. You're doing that now." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I want to be the man Dad was, the one who'd have seen through Sarah from the start." "You're getting there," I said, squeezing his hand. "And I'm proud of you for trying." The legal battle with Sarah continued, but it was background noise now. Her threats to take half of everything fizzled as the evidence mounted against her. The video, the notebook, the bank statements. They were a noose tightening around her neck. Her sister stopped taking her calls. Her lawyer's arguments grew weaker, and the perfect life she'd fought to protect was gone. But the mystery of Tommy lingered, a quiet thread I couldn't let go. I returned to the alley one last time, hoping for a final clue. The abandoned building was being boarded up, its secrets locked away. I left another note just in case. "Tommy, your family now. Come home." I didn't expect a response, but as I turned to leave, I saw something in the dirt, a small, carved wooden bird, no bigger than my thumb. It felt like a gift, a sign that Tommy's courage had left a mark on the world and on me. As I walked back to the house, the bird in my pocket, I felt lighter than I had in months. Sarah had tried to erase me, but she'd failed. Tommy had saved me. Michael was finding his way back, and I was Dorothy Wells, a woman who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was ours, and we'd walk it together. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee, the kind untainted by secrets, its warmth curling through the air like a promise. I stood at the kitchen counter, pouring 3 mugs, one for me, one for Michael, and one for Tommy, who sat at the table, his nose buried in a math workbook, his reading glasses slipping down his small nose. The house, once a prison of Sarah's lies, was alive again, filled with the hum of family. Not the one I'd been born into, but the one we'd chosen to build. I was Dorothy Wells, 70 years old, a grandmother, a mother, a survivor. For the first time since Frank died, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months had passed since the confrontation that shattered Sarah's carefully constructed facade. The legal fallout had been swift and merciless. Sarah faced charges of elder abuse fraud and identity theft. Her nursing license revoked, her perfect life reduced to ash. Her lawyer's attempts to paint me as a delusional old woman crumbled under the weight of my evidence. The amber vial, the notebook, the video of her poisoning my coffee. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. Sarah would serve time, her dreams of wealth and control buried under the consequences of her cruelty. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see her fall to know I'd won. But victory wasn't the absence of scars. Michael and I had spent those months rebuilding brick by fragile brick. He'd taken a leave from work to untangle the legal mess, but more importantly, to untangle us mother and son, fractured by betrayal but bound by love. Our evenings were spent in the kitchen drinking coffee from matching mugs, talking about everything we'd avoided for too long. "I keep seeing Dad in you," Michael said one night, his voice soft. "The way you fought back, the way you didn't give up." "You're like him, too," I said, smiling. "You just needed a reminder." He'd nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm trying, Mom. I want to be the man he'd be proud of." "You already are," I told him, and for the first time, I believed it. The heart of our new beginning, though, was Tommy Chen now, Tommy Wells, legally and forever. 4 months ago, we'd welcomed him into our home as foster parents, and just last week, the adoption papers had been signed. The boy who'd saved me with a crumpled note was now my grandson, his presence a light that banished the shadows Sarah had cast. He was no longer the scared, dirty child I'd met outside the corner store. Proper meals, a safe bed, and the knowledge that he was wanted had transformed him into the bright, curious 11-year-old he was meant to be. Dorothy Tommy said, not looking up from his workbook, his pencil scratching out a math problem. "Can you check number 7? I keep messing it up." I walked over, leaning over his shoulder to study his work. His handwriting was neater now, but I could still see the faint echo of the shaky scrawl from his notes. "You're close, sweetheart," I said, pointing to a multiplication step. "You just flipped the digits here. Try it again." He erased and recalculated, his face lighting up when he got the right answer. "Thanks. You're way better at this than my last foster mom." The mention of his past was rare, now a sign of the trust he was building. Therapy was helping, teaching him that not all adults were out to hurt him, that this home was real, permanent. I ruffled his hair, earning a playful scowl. "Keep that up, and you'll be teaching me math soon," I said. Michael appeared in the doorway, straightening his tie, his off-key humming filling the room with a warmth I hadn't heard in years. He'd changed, too, these past months. The guilt that had weighed him down after Sarah's departure had transformed into purpose. He'd started volunteering with a local organization for foster children, using his business acumen to advocate for kids like Tommy. It wasn't just atonement, it was a calling, one that made him stand taller, smile brighter. "Big day today," he announced, grabbing his coffee. "Final adoption hearing. You ready, Tommy?" Tommy looked up, his expression carefully neutral, a habit from years of guarding his hope. "Yeah," he said, but I saw the spark in his eyes, the one he tried to hide. He'd learned early not to trust good news, but he was starting to believe in us. "Whatever happens, you're staying here," I said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "This is your home now." Even if the adoption doesn't go through, he asked, his voice small. It'll go through, Michael said, his confidence unwavering. Judge Henderson's already indicated she's on board. But even if something goes wrong, you're ours, Tommy. No paperwork changes that. Tommy nodded, his shoulders relaxing, and I felt a swell of pride for my son. He was becoming the man Frank had always known he could be. After breakfast, we piled into Michael's car, the Denver streets slipping past in a blur of autumn colors. Tommy was quiet, holding my hand tightly as we walked into the courthouse, his small fingers warm against mine. The hearing was brief, almost anticlimactic, after months of anticipation. Judge Henderson, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, asked Tommy if he understood what adoption meant if he wanted Michael and me to be his legal family. His answer was simple, perfect. They already are my family. This just makes it official. When the judge signed the papers, Tommy Chen became Tommy Wells, my grandson, in name as well as heart. Outside the courthouse, he looked up at me, his serious eyes softened by a smile. Dorothy, can I ask you something? Anything. Sweetheart, I said, crouching to meet his gaze. If I hadn't given you that note, what do you think would have happened? I paused, the question pulling me back to that morning 6 months ago when a boy's courage had changed everything. Without Tommy's warning, Sarah's plan might have succeeded. I could be in a facility now, sedated and forgotten, my savings drained to fund her perfect life. I think you saved us all, I said finally. Not just me, but Michael too, and yourself. Sometimes when people are drowning, they need someone to throw them a rope. He nodded, then grinned, a rare burst of joy that lit up his face. So we all saved each other. We did. I agreed, pulling him into a hug. We did. As we drove home, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. It had started with a boy in an alley, his note a lifeline in a sea of betrayal. Sarah had wanted to erase me, to strip away my independence and dignity for her own gain. Instead, her cruelty had forged something beautiful, a family bound by choice, not obligation. Tommy's courage had been the spark, Michael's redemption the fuel, and my own strength the foundation. That evening, as I tucked Tommy into bed in his new room, decorated with posters of planets and a bookshelf I'd filled with stories Frank would have loved, I saw the wooden bird on his nightstand, the one I'd found in the alley. "Where'd you get that?" I asked, my voice soft. "I made it." He said, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Left it for you to find. Wanted you to know I was still watching out." My heart swelled, a gentle explosion of gratitude. "You're always watching out, aren't you? Somebody's got to." He said, his smile sleepy but real. "Good night, Grandma Dorothy." The word grandma hit me like a wave, warm and overwhelming. "Good night, sweetheart," I said, turning off the light. "Sweet dreams." As I walked to my own room, the house quiet except for the soft sounds of Michael moving downstairs, I reflected on the strange path we'd traveled. Betrayal had been the catalyst, Sarah's poison, Michael's blindness, my own vulnerability. But from that darkness had come light. Tommy's bravery, Michael's growth, my own rebirth. I was no longer just a widow, a mother, a victim. I was Dorothy Wells, a woman who'd faced the abyss and built a family from its ashes. The mystery of Tommy's presence lingered, a quiet gift I didn't need to fully understand. He'd been a shadow in the alley, a boy who'd seen my pain and acted when no one else did. His carved bird sat on my dresser now, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, someone might be watching, ready to throw a rope. I sat on my bed, the navy dress folded carefully in my closet, and looked out the window at the suburban street. The world was still, the stars bright against the autumn sky. For the first time since Frank died, I felt at peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. I'd lost a husband, nearly lost a son, but I'd gained a grandson, a family, a life reclaimed. The next morning, I made coffee for three, the ritual now a symbol of our new beginning. Tommy was at the table working on a new math problem, his glasses slipping again. Michael was upstairs, humming off key, preparing for a day of volunteering. The house was alive with noise, chaos, love the kind of family I'd always dreamed of. As I poured the coffee, I thought of Sarah locked away by her own choices and felt no anger, only pity. She'd tried to break me, but instead she'd forged us stronger. Tommy looked up, catching my eye. "What's so funny, Grandma? Just happy," I said, setting his mug in front of him. "Really happy." He grinned. And in that moment, I knew we'd be okay. We were the Wells family, Dorothy, Michael Tommy bound by courage, redemption, and love. And that was more than enough.